राधे
मन्नाथ श्री जगन्नाथो मद्गुरु श्री जगद्गुरु मदात्मा सर्वभूतात्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। वंशी विभूषितकरान् नवनीरदाभात् पीताम्बरा दरुणबिम्बफलाधरोष्ठात् पूर्णेन्दुसुन्दरमुखादरविन्दनेत्रात् कृष्णात् परं किमपि तत्त्वमहं न जाने। नमः कमलनाभाय नमः कमलमालिने नमः कमलपादाय नमस्ते कमलेक्षण यो ब्रह्माणं विदधाति पूर्वं यो वै वेदांश्च प्रहिणोति तस्मै तद्ब्रह्म देवमात्मबुद्धिप्रकाशं मुमुक्षुर्वै शरणमहं प्रपद्ये। As a regular practice, we will chant for 10 minutes and thereafter we will begin with the subject. Oh, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe,
Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe.
Oh, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe,
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 Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe, Radhe Govind, Govind Radhe.
Oh, Radhe Govind, Radhe Govind, Radhe Govind Govind Radhe
Radhe Govind Govind Radhe Radhe Govind Govind Radhe
बोलिए अलबेली सरकार की
जय।
श्रीमद सतगुरु सरकार की
जय।
Rendering an explanation of a Vedic verse, I have disclosed to you so far that happiness is the universal aim of life. Since every living being is a fraction of God, who is the embodiment of perfect bliss. Thus, every individual has been and is incessantly striving to attain happiness since beginningless time, but has not been able to attain it, but has not been able to taste even a drop of it so far. The reason was reflected upon, and we discovered through the help of the Vedas that it is due to ignorance about the reality of God that the individual soul has not been able to attain its ultimate goal. The Vedas reveal to us that the knowledge of God is the only possible means of attaining supreme happiness. Thereafter, an attempt was made to know God, but the Vedas and other scriptures told us that God is beyond our comprehension. Why? Because He is spiritual, He is divine, and the media that we employ to comprehend Him, that is our senses, mind, and intellect, are material. Moreover, He is omniscient, all-knowing, whereas the individual soul is ignorant. He is the inspirer, since He inspires our senses, mind, and intellect. He is the illuminator, and He illumines our senses, mind, and intellect. He is the upholder, and He upholds our senses, mind, and intellect. He is the knower. Moreover, He is omniscient, all-knowing, whereas the individual soul is ignorant. Furthermore, the scriptures describe Him in a series of paradoxes, that is, mutual contradictions, which make it impossible for even Brahma, Vishnu, and Shankar to know Him. Learning this, we become disheartened. But again, the scriptures inspired a hope in us by stating that although God is beyond our comprehension, yet He can be comprehended and attained by the individual upon whom He bestows His grace. Then we inquired whether God bestows grace haphazardly or charges a price for it. The scriptures told us that God's grace is attained once we surrender to Him. And the meaning of surrender was explained to you. Surrender means the cessation of all activity. To surrender means to do nothing. Therefore, surrendering to God cannot be considered a condition or a price to pay for His grace. However, attaining the state of doing nothing, in other words, surrendering to God, surrender means to do nothing. Attaining that state of doing nothing at this point in time requires a lot of doing on our part. The first step, the preliminary step, is the detachment of the mind from the world, since the mind is the performer of all our actions. And in order to detach the mind from the world, in an attempt to attach it to God, we must understand the nature of this world. We need to comprehend its origin and nature. This brings us to today's topic. There are two views regarding the world. One view holds the world to be real, and the other view holds the world to be unreal. Philosophers like Plato, Berkeley, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, etc., believe the world to be unreal. According to these philosophers, the world has no independent existence outside our thoughts. It's a product of our imagination, they say. 2,500 years ago, in India, the first Jagat Guru, Sri Shankaracharya, also claimed the world to be unreal. He compares the world to a snake in the dark, which, upon closer inspection, turns out to be only a piece of rope. In other words, he sees the world as a mere illusion, like the imaginary snake in the dark. However, the later Jagat Gurus, such as Nimbarkacharya, Ramanujacharya, and Madhavacharya, reject the theory of Sri Shankaracharya. They do not view the world as a mere illusion, but as a very real entity. And 700 years after the last Jagat Guru, that is Madhavacharya, the title of the fifth original Jagat Guru has been conferred upon my spiritual master, and his name is Jagat Guru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj. He was given this honor on January 14th, 1957, at the age of 34, by Kashi Vidvat Parishad, a body of 500 most eminent, most distinguished, outstanding, highly intellectual scholars, scriptural scholars in India. These 500 scholars unanimously agreed. Note that many of these scholars had spent their entire life thoroughly studying and analyzing one specific scripture, perhaps 50 years, perhaps some of them may have spent their 60 years, 40 years, just specializing in one single scripture. So these scholars, for them to reach a decision unanimously, it is a great accomplishment, because they're very highly intellectual, and Shri Maharajji was only 34 years old at that time. He was just a young man in front of them. So they unanimously agreed, after listening to a series of philosophical discourses revealing the in-depth knowledge of all the scriptures, all the Vedic scriptures. Shri Maharajji initially spoke in scholarly Sanskrit, the original language of the Vedas. And they agreed that Shri Maharajji was a Shrotriyam Brahmanist. In other words, not only does he possess a thorough knowledge of the scriptures, but seeing his divine personality and his extraordinary knowledge, they were forced to admit that he was also a Brahmanist, which means a God-realized soul. Consequently, they honored him with a very lengthy and impressive title, part of which reads, Shrimad Padvakya Praman Paravareen Ved Marga Pratishthapanacharya Nikhil Darshan Samanvayacharya Sanatan Vedic Dharma Pratisthapana Sat Sampradaya Paramacharya Bhakti Yog Rasavatar Bhagavadanant Shri Vibhushit Jagat Guru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj 1008. So they gave him the title of Bhakti Yog Rasavatar, which means that he is a personification, the dissension of bhakti, yog, ras, the nectar of bhakti, the nectar of divine bliss. And one other main title, Nikhila Darshan Samanvayacharya. This means that he is a reconciler of all the philosophical systems, the discrepancies that seem to appear in all the different shastras, as well as the writings of the previous Jagat Gurus within the principles of religion. As you know, there are a number of doctrines, number of philosophies prevalent in the present age. And they are empiricism, naturalism, relativism, collectivism, idealism, fascism, Marxism, etc. And there are a number of philosophies or doctrines particular to India. And they can be divided into two, materialism and spiritualism. These are the atheistic and theistic systems. Under the atheistic systems, we have Charvakvad, Jainism, and Buddhism. Buddhism is further divided into four: Vaibhashikvad, direct realism; Sautrantikvad, indirect realism; Yogacharvad, idealism; and Madhyamikvad, relativism. Similarly, under the theistic, the pious, the theistic systems, we have Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Purv Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa, etc. So, under the atheistic systems, the reason why these doctrines are claimed as being atheistic is because they do not follow the principles that are contained within the Upanishads. So there are so many philosophies, and Shivaji was given the title of being Nikhila Darshan Samanvayacharya, the reconciler of all the philosophical systems. So how does he, getting back to the subject, how does he reconcile the views of his predecessors regarding the world, of the previous Jagat Gurus? How does he explain the world? He says, according to him, both Shankaracharya as well as the other three Jagat Gurus are all correct. According to him, the world is real as well as unreal. So Shankaracharya claimed the world to be unreal, whereas the other three Jagat Gurus declared it to be real. So I shall explain. Shimhaji says that this world is not limited to the world we see around us. In the form of mountains, oceans, the sky, the sun, the moon, etc. This is only the external world. There's also an internal world, the world of our mind, which is comprised of our thoughts, ideas, hopes, wishes, and desires. So therefore, he recognizes two worlds, the external world and the internal world. So it becomes necessary for us to examine both. Let us start by taking a look at the external world. This world is the gross world, the world we live in, which is made of the 5 gross elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth, as well as the relative products of these elements. However, it would be very naive of us to restrict the outer world to just the world we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Why? Because you see, creation consists of innumerable Brahmand, or cosmic eggs, or world regions. And each one of these cosmic eggs is governed by Brahma, Vishnu, and Shankar. And the earth is just a minute fraction of one of these innumerable cosmic eggs, world regions. And what is the size of this cosmic egg, a single cosmic egg? According to the Vedas, one cosmic egg constitutes 5 mandalas, 7 lokas, and 3 trilokis. According to the Vedas, the earth that we are living on is one of the mandalas referred to as Bhumandal. This Bhumandal contains within it Bhurlok. And this Bhumandal derives its stability from the attraction force of another mandal called Surya Mandal. And this Surya Mandal contains within it a loka called Swahalok or Swarlok. Now between Surya Mandal and Bhumandal, there's another mandal known as Chandra Mandal. And this Chandra Mandal contains within it a lok called Bhuvahalok. Thus these 3, Bhur, Bhavaha, Swaha, constitute what is called a Triloki. This group of 3 lokas is referred to by the Vedas as Rodasi, and it includes Bhumandal, Chandramandal, and Suryamandal. Now the Suryamandal derives its stability from the attraction force of another mandal called Parmeshti Mandal. And this Parmeshti Mandal contains within it a lok called Janalok. And between Janalok and Swarlok, there's another lok called Mahalok. So these 3 lokas, Bhu, Bhava, Swaha is the first Triloki, Swaha, Maha, Janaha constitute the second Triloki, which extends up to Parmeshti Mandal. And this Parmeshti Mandal derives its stability from the attraction force of another mandal called Swayambhu Mandal. And this Swayambhu Mandal contains within it Satyalok. Now between Satyalok and Janalok, there's another lok called Tapahalok. So these 3, Janaha, Tapaha, Sataha, constitute the third Triloki. So in this way, the point is, one cosmic egg contains 5 mandalas, 7 lokas, and 3 trilokis. 7 lokas, Bhu, Bhava, Swaha, Maha, Janaha, Tapaha, Sataha. 5 mandalas, Bhumandal, Chandramandal, Surya Mandal, Parmeshti Mandal, and Swayambhu Mandal. And 3 trilokis, Bhu, Bhava, Swaha, Swaha, Maha, Janaha, Janaha, Tapaha, Sataha. So in this way, one cosmic egg, this is the vast size, the vast expanse, unbroken surface of one single cosmic egg. And there are innumerable such cosmic eggs in existence. This is why the Devi Bhagavat states, Sankhya chet rajasamasti na vishvanam kadachana. It may well be possible to count the grains of sand on earth, but it is impossible to count the number of innumerable cosmic eggs in creation. And the earth, the cosmic egg, which contains the earth or the Bhumandal, is the smallest of them all. So the point is that it is impossible for us to comprehend the infinite vastness with our material and finite mind. In other words, and this extraordinary vastness in the form of this universe at large has been manifested by God with the help of Maya. And what is Maya? The scriptures tell us. Mayam tu prakritim vidyan mayinam tu maheshwaram tasyavayav bhutaistu vyaptam sarvamidam jagat. Shvetashvatara Upanishad 4:10. Maya is a power of God. It is a potency of God. The Bhagavata also states, Esha Maya Bhagavataha Sargasthithyanta Karani 11.3.16. And the Shandilya Sutra also says, Shaktitva Nanritam Vedyam. That Maya is a power of God. The Gita too states, Daivi Hesha Gunamai Mama Maya Duratyaya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Maya Metam Tarantite 7:14. Lord Krishna says, Mama Maya. Maya is my power. Maya is his power. And the Ramayana also says, Jagat Prakasha Prakashak Ramu Mayadhish Jnana Gunadhamu. That God is the Lord of Maya. In other words, he governs Maya. So being a potency, a power of God, Maya is eternal, ever existing, just like God, as the Vedas tell us. Aja mekam lohit shukla krishnam bahvihi prajaha srijamanam sarupah ajo hyeko jushamano nushete jahatyenam bhukta bhogam ajonyah. Shvetashvatara Upanishad 4:5. So the scriptures tell us that Maya is an eternal potency which creates the universe. Here a question may come into our mind because the scriptures also inform us that Maya is an unconscious entity. It's an unconscious entity which is also devoid of intelligence. In other words, it's Jada Shakti. It's referred to as Jada Shakti. So it would not be wrong to compare Maya, say, to a piece of cloth, which is also devoid of consciousness and which does not possess a mind or intellect. So if Maya, which is a godly power, which is inert, Jada, lifeless, and yet it creates this universe, how is this possible? This is the question. The Ramayana answers this question. Jasu satyata te jada maya bhas satya iva sahit sahaya. The Ramayana tells us that although Maya is an unconscious entity, yet it becomes conscious. It appears to be conscious. In other words, Maya acquires the power of a conscious and an intelligent entity through the power of God. For example, a pair of tongs is an inanimate, lifeless object. And yet these tongs can perform jobs that we are incapable of performing on our own. They can pick up hot burning coals or freezing cold ice cubes and hold them indefinitely. However, these tongs cannot do anything on their own. They are inanimate, lifeless. And yet they acquire the power to work through the power of the hands. If the hands were to withdraw their power from the tongs, these tongs would become lifeless, helpless. inanimate, once again, incapable of working. If we let them go, then they become inanimate, incapable of working. Similarly, although Maya is a power of God, it is a Jad Shakti, but it acquires the power to work through the power of God. If God were to withdraw his power, remove his power, then Maya would be rendered helpless once again. It would become unable to work, it would become incapable of working. So you understand that Maya is a power of God, and it creates the universe through God's inspiration, through God's power. And because God is real, and because he's ultimately responsible for this creation, it means that the external world is real. The Mahabharata states, confirms, Satyam bhutmayam jagat, satyad bhutani jatani sthavarani charani cha, sthavarani charani cha. Meaning that the external world is real. So now let us go back to Shimaji's explanation of the world. As I mentioned before, he recognizes two worlds, the external world and the internal world. He recognizes the external world to be real and the internal world to be unreal. So now, having taken a look at the external world and having proved it to be real, let us talk about the inner world and see why he declares it to be unreal. So first of all, we need to find out, let us see how the inner world is created. You see, the creator of the inner world is the mind. In other words, our thoughts, ideas, wishes, hopes, and desires, which constitute the internal world, are created by the mind. And the mind is under the control of Maya, as the Vedas tell us. Indriyebhya para hyartha arthebhyascha param manah manasastu para buddhir buddhiratma mahan parah mahtah parma vyaktam avyaktat purushah parah purushana param kinchit sa kashtha sa paragati. 3:10-11. And I had recited this verse a couple of days ago. And it means that very powerful, great are the senses, our senses, but even greater than the senses are the objects of these senses. Greater than the sense objects is the mind, greater than the mind is the intellect, greater than the intellect is the soul, and greater than the soul is Maya. So in this way, we see that the mind is ultimately governed by Maya. So now the next question that should arise in your mind, if you are listening attentively, is that Maya creates both the external world as well as the internal world. Then why is the external world real and the internal world unreal? So why is the external world real and the internal world unreal? Well, the Ramayana tells us, the Ramayana explains that Maya has two aspects, Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. Ek rachai jag gun bas jaake Prabhu prerit nahi nij bal taake ek dusht atishaya dukh rupa ja bas jeev para bhav kupa. So the Ramayana tells us that Maya has two aspects. One aspect of Maya creates the universe, and the other aspect of Maya rules over the mind. Now the aspect of Maya which creates the universe, creates the external world, in other words, is Vidya Maya, or the intelligent aspect, since it is equipped with the knowledge of God. Thus, it is Vidya Maya which creates the universe with the help of God, with the intelligent aspect of God. The other aspect of Maya, that is Avidya Maya, or the ignorant aspect, rules over the mind. And for this reason, the external world is real because it is created by the intelligent aspect, and the internal world unreal because it is created by the ignorant aspect of Maya. And because the external world is real, all its products are real and remain the same. For example, you will always see a tree having the same form, head down and feet up. You would never see a tree with head up or feet down. And what about the internal world? Because it is unreal, the world of our mind is ever changing. Let me give you an example to clarify the difference between the two. Suppose, let us say there are two friends who are walking down the street, and suddenly, both of them suddenly happen to see a shining object on the ground in front of them. Both recognize the object to be a diamond and run towards it to pick it up. The faster a runner gets to it first, and the diamond becomes his. Now this man is naturally very happy, since he has just found a diamond. His friend, however, is very sad. Now the diamond is one and the same, and yet it has created two completely opposite feelings in the minds of the two people, in the minds of the two friends. Now suppose a third man happens to come by, and he inquires as to why one man is so happy and the other so gloomy. After listening to their story, and despite seeing the diamond itself, this man failed to understand why one man is so happy and the other so gloomy over a mere stone. The diamond did not create any feelings in the mind of the third man. Why? Because this man did not know the value of the diamond. So mind you, the diamond is still one and the same, and yet it creates three different feelings within three different individuals. These feelings are a product of the mind, and therefore they are unreal. Let me give you another example. Suppose a woman walks into a room full of people. One person looks at her as his daughter, one looks at her as his sister, one as his wife, and still another as his mother. One looks at her lovingly, one person looks at her in anger, and another looks at her with hatred. The woman is one and the same, yet she's seen differently by different people. The woman, who is a product of the external world, is real, and yet the feelings towards her vary from person to person. Because these feelings are created by the inner world of the mind, they are unreal. So you see, the outer world is real, whereas the inner world is unreal. This fact was also accepted by Vidyananda, a disciple of Shankaracharya himself. And he stated this in the scripture Panchadashi. Now, in spite of the fact that the external world is real and the internal world unreal, the inner world of our mind is unreal, it is the internal world of the mind which poses a real problem for us. Why? Well, first of all, let me tell you that Leibniz, a German philosopher and mathematician, has also admitted, he says that our inner world is richer, ampler, larger, and more complex. How? Because, for example, we accomplish many things in the inner world of our mind which we would never be able to accomplish in the external world. For example, we would never be able to fly like a bird in the external world, but we easily accomplish this miraculous act in the inner world of our mind, through our thoughts, through our dreams. But how is the inner world dangerous for us? The scriptures say it is dangerous because due to it, we become attached to the external world. So if the internal world could somehow be destroyed, there would be no question of forming attachments to the outer world. If the inner world could be destroyed, then the outer world would no longer pose a threat for us. This is why the scriptures say, Bharat hi hoi na raj mad, vidhi hari har pad pai. The individual whose internal world is destroyed remains detached from the external world, remains detached from the world, even if he's offered the highest seats, the seats of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shankar. And some examples of these individuals, or saints, I should say, are Dhruv, Prahlad, Ambarish, Janak, and Dashrath, the father of Lord Ram. They were all saints, and yet they were all kings, and yet completely detached from the world, experiencing the presence of God in each and every particle of this creation. Sarvam khalvidam brahma, purukheve dagvam sarvam, isha vasyam dagvam sarvam. सिया राममय सब जग जानी, करऊं प्रणाम जोरी जुग पानी. So the point is, once our inner world, the inner world of our thoughts, ideas, desires, wishes, hopes, the inner world of the mind is destroyed, the individual starts experiencing the omnipresence of God. If the inner world is destroyed, the outer world can no longer harm us in the least. But what if the situation is reversed, if the scenario is reversed? What if the outer world is destroyed and the inner world is still in existence? Will our mind become detached, seeing that the external world is non-existent, is no longer before us? No. The danger of attachment will still be there as long as the inner world is in existence. Let me give you an example to show you what I mean. Suppose you have a son to whom you are very much attached, and suppose he goes off to live in another country one day. Now your son is no longer before you, he's no longer in your presence. You cannot see him, hear him, or talk to him. In fact, none of your 5 senses can experience him. But does this mean that you will stop thinking about your son? No, your mind is still attached to your son. You will still think and worry about him, even though he's no longer in your presence. This is what is meant by the inner world existing even in the absence of the outer world. Your son, who's a product of the external world, is non-existent. In other words, he's no longer before you, and yet your inner world of your thought, the inner world of your thoughts about your son is still in existence. You are still attached to your son, in spite of his absence. In fact, in cases of extreme attachment, they say that a person can even die by merely thinking about the other person. Furthermore, you may be surprised to know that even a person who is blind since birth sees dreams. This is very odd, this is very surprising, because our dreams are generally a confused mixture, a jumbled mixture of what we see in our daily life. For example, suppose it may be that you, during the day, you see a bird flying in the air, and all of a sudden you have a strong urge to fly like a bird in the sky. So at night you see yourself flying in the sky in your dreams. But a person who was born blind has never seen the external world. How does he see the world in his dreams then? This indicates that our internal world is so great that it remains, it continues to exist, it remains intact, even in the absence of the outer world. Furthermore, the internal world continues to expand by merely thinking about the outer world. So you understand that as long as our inner world exists within us, there remains the danger of attachment to the outer world. However, the influence of the outer world is much greater when it is present before us than when we are secluded from it. The reason is that the inner world expands in the presence of the outer world. Let me give you an example. Suppose a child is crying for cookies. As long as he does not see the cookies in the cookie jar, he will cry in front of his mother, and as long as if the mother ignores him or refuses to give in, the child will cry and whine for a little while, and then he will forget about the cookies eventually. But if the child happens to see the cookies, then he will keep on crying until the mother gives in to him. So again, the reason is that the child's desire for the cookies grows immediately upon seeing them. Let us take another example. Let us say that there's a person you dislike immensely. You think about this person from time to time, but let us say, if it so happens that you see this person face to face one day, your dislike for him will grow even stronger, and you will think about him more often. The same is true for someone you love dearly. So the point is, the implication is that the internal world expands in the presence of the external world. Although it expands even in its absence, yet it expands even more in its presence than in its absence. So just to summarize, to make sure you understand the concept that is being conveyed, to summarize some of the important points, there are two worlds in existence. There is the external world, which we live in, which is made of the 5 elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth, as well as the relative products of these elements. And the other is the internal world, the world of our mind, which consists of our ideas, thoughts, wishes, hopes, and desires. Both worlds are created by Maya, a potency of God, and yet the external world is real, whereas the internal world unreal. The reason is that Maya has 2 aspects, Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. The aspect of Maya that creates the external world is Vidya Maya, the intelligent aspect, and the other which creates the internal world is Avidya Maya, the ignorant aspect. And therefore, the external world is real, whereas the internal world unreal. Now, because the external world is real, it does not change in form like the internal world does. All its products remain the same. And yet, however, it is the internal world of the mind that is at the root of all our problems. Why? Because, as I explained, that the internal world expands not only in the presence of the outer world, but also in its absence. So what that means is that our desires, which constitute the internal world, are ever increasing, as a result of which we are getting more and more entangled in the external world and getting further and further away from God. So now the question is, why is the mind, why is the inner world of our mind so attached to the external world? The answer is very simple. Because the mind firmly believes that there is happiness in the external world and that we will attain this happiness sooner or later. So therefore, the next step is to make the mind understand that we must explain to it the reality of the world, and that is that there is no real happiness in this material world, and that real happiness lies only in the Supreme Being. As the scriptures tell us, Anand evadhastat, Anand uparishtat, Anandah purastat, Anandah paschat, Anand uttarataha, Anando dakshinataha, Anand eve dagvam sarvam. Chandogya Upanishad says that there's bliss and bliss alone about him, above him, below him, to his east, to his west, to his north, to his south, inside him, outside him, and all around him. And even logically thinking, if there were happiness in the world, then everyone would have experienced it alike and at all times. But that is not so. The fact is that a person or an object that makes us happy one moment makes us miserable the next. We eat one rasgulla, we are so happy, really satisfies our taste buds. We eat a second rasgulla, it doesn't give us as much pleasure as the first one, but it still gives us pleasure. We eat a third rasgulla, and the pleasure that we attain is being decreased. And after the sixth rasgulla, you will say, oh, I'm going to throw up. I can't eat any more rasgullas. I hate rasgullas. Don't feed me anything but rasgulla. And same is true for an individual. However, we could also use the same logic to prove that there's no unhappiness in the world also. We could use the same logic to say that there's no happiness and there's no unhappiness either. In other words, what we have to do is to detach our mind from the world. We must free it from the feelings of love as well as hatred for the world. Only then will the mind become eligible to be surrendered to God. But before we can surrender our detached mind to God, we must find out, of course, the various paths that can be followed in the process of self-surrender. Moreover, we must find out which among these paths is the most suitable for us. And who will answer the questions and address the problems that we are likely to encounter in the process of self-surrender to God? Who will educate us in all these matters? God Himself? Or the Guru? Who is the Guru? Why do we need a Guru? What is the entity? Who is the entity known as the Guru? What are his qualifications? What is the nature of a Guru? The answers to these questions and much more will be revealed in tomorrow's discourse. That's all for today. Boli Vrindavan Bihari Lal ki Jai. Srimad Sadguru Sarkar ki Jai. जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे। राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे।
ओ राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे,
ओ राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे। Everyone raise your hands.
गोविंद राधे,
ओ राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे, राधे राधे गोविंद